Somewhere along the way, someone convinced you that you didn't know enough, that the answer was in the next book, the next framework, the next person with the right credentials and the right vocabulary to explain you to yourself. And you believed them. Most of us did. This is the UncaRved. There is a phrase that has been circling the planet for over a century, moving from mouth to mouth, from continent to continent, from grandmothers to grandchildren in languages that have never touched each other. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Most people who say it have no idea where it came from. They don't know that a German philosopher wrote it down in 1888. They don't know his name. They don't need to, because the phrase didn't survive because of him. It survived because it was already true before he wrote it. That is the thing about real knowledge. It doesn't need an author to keep it alive. It travels on its own weight. It passes through people who have never opened a book about philosophy or psychology or human resilience. It settles into the language of ordinary life because ordinary life keeps confirming it. The grandmother who says it to a child who just fell, she is not quoting anyone. She is reporting what she has seen, what her mother saw, what 1,000 years of living distilled into something short enough to carry. Not a citation, not a reference, a truth so compressed by the weight of collective experience that it fit inside a single sentence. This is what the proverb is. Not folk decoration, not the quaint shorthand of people who didn't have access to more sophisticated ideas. The distillation of evidence. Every culture on Earth has its version. The specific words differ. The compression is the same, because the experience is the same. Suffering that doesn't end you changes the material you're made of. People have been observing this for as long as there have been people. And what gets passed forward, what earns the right to survive across generations and languages and everything that time destroys, is not the elaborate version. It is the shortest true thing. We live in a time that has decided the answers live somewhere else. In a book published last year, in a podcast recommended by someone who read an article about the podcast, in a framework with a name, always a name, that packages something ancient in language new enough to feel like a discovery. And there is a whole industry built on that belief, that you are incomplete as you are, that what you need is somewhere outside of you, that the gap between where you are and where you should be can be closed by consuming the right thing. It is a very profitable belief, and it is almost entirely false. Before there were self-help sections in bookstores, before there were bookstores, before there was a market for the packaging of human wisdom, people still lost things, still failed, still loved badly and recovered slowly and made peace with outcomes they did not choose. And they did it without a methodology, without a certified practitioner, without a 12-step framework validated by clinical research. They did it because the knowledge of how to survive was not something they acquired. It was something they were. It lived in the body before it lived in the book. It was spoken in proverbs before it was written in chapters. It was passed from hand to hand in the form of stories that didn't announce what they were because they didn't need to. You didn't need to know it was wisdom to absorb it. That was the point. Here is what the Proverbs knew that the books keep rediscovering. That suffering, when it doesn't break you, builds something in you that nothing else can build. That the person who has been through the fire moves differently than the person who has only read about fire. That there is a kind of knowing that only comes from having lived something, not from having understood it, not from having processed it, not from having integrated it in any technical sense, but simply from having stayed in it long enough for it to become part of you. The philosophy books call this post-traumatic growth. The psychology papers call it resilience. The biology researchers call it stress inoculation. Your grandmother called it, "What doesn't kill you makes you stronger." She got there first, not because she was brilliant, because she was paying attention, and because she didn't need a peer-reviewed paper to trust what she had seen with her own eyes. There is a particular kind of arrogance in the age we live in, and it moves quietly, so quietly that most people never notice it in themselves. It is the arrogance of believing that knowledge only counts once it has been validated by the right kind of institution. Once it has a citation. Once someone with a doctorate has confirmed it in language abstract enough to require a translator. The moment that happens, the moment the researcher publishes the study that proves what your grandfather already knew about adversity, suddenly it becomes real. Suddenly it gets a TED Talk. Suddenly it appears in the subtitle of a best-selling book. And people say, "I never thought about it that way." But they did. They just didn't trust it until someone with a name tag told them it was true. But there is something underneath this that goes further. It is not just that the Proverbs were right before the researchers confirmed them. It is that the knowledge they were pointing to was never outside of you to begin with. You didn't need anyone to teach you about resilience. You needed to live long enough to recognize what was already operating in you. The proverb didn't give you the knowledge. It gave you the language for what you had already survived. There is a difference between those two things that is worth sitting still with. One means you received something. The other means you recognized something. And recognition is a completely different relationship to knowledge than acquisition. When you acquire something, you can lose it. When you recognize something, you cannot unknow it. This is the thing that the industry of self-knowledge doesn't want you to understand. Not because it is malicious, most of it isn't, but because understanding it would make you a much harder customer to keep. The knowledge you are looking for is not ahead of you. It is not in the next chapter, or the next episode, or the next conversation with someone who has studied what you are going through. It is in the fact that you are still here. In the things you survived before you knew you were surviving them. In the decisions you made from the gut that turned out to be right, not because you were lucky, but because something in you already knew. That something is not mysterious. It is not spiritual in any complicated sense of the word. It is the accumulated intelligence of every human being who lived before you and left their understanding in the form of a phrase short enough to outlast them. You inherited it. You are made of it. Lao Tzu, writing 25 centuries ago in the final chapter of the Tao Te Ching, put it this way: true words are not beautiful. Beautiful words are not true. He was not talking about aesthetics. He was talking about the relationship between truth and elaboration. The more dressed up a thing has to be to get you to believe it, the more chapters, the more endorsements, the more credentials stacked on the cover, the further it probably is from something you didn't already know. Real truth tends to arrive in 4 words. Not because it is simple, because it has been compressed by the weight of human experience over generations until only the essential remains. The proverb is not the beginning of wisdom. It is what wisdom looks like after 1,000 years of editing. Nobody sat down to write a proverb. Proverbs happen the way rivers happen, not by design, but by the insistence of water finding the lowest path through every obstacle until nothing is left but the line of least resistance, the line of pure truth. You already know what you need to do about the thing you have been avoiding. You already know what the pattern is. You already know which relationship costs more than it gives. You already know what rest looks like and when you last had it. You know what kind of work makes you feel like yourself and what kind slowly hollows you out. You know all of this. You have known it for longer than you have been willing to admit it. The search for answers is sometimes what we do instead of acting on the ones we already have. And every book we buy, every framework we adopt, every system we try on and discard, there is nothing wrong with any of them. But there is something important to notice about the pattern. Is sometimes another way of not doing what we already know needs to be done.
This is not an argument against learning. Read the books, follow the thinkers, sit with the ideas that sharpen the way you see. But know what you are doing when you do it. You are not receiving something that was not in you. You are finding language for what already is. The best teachers, the ones that actually change something, don't give you new information. They give you permission to trust what you already sensed. They confirm what the body knew before the mind had words for it.
They do, in the end, what the proverb does. They compress something real into something you can carry. And then they send you back to your own life, the only place where any of it ever actually applies. The knowledge was never lost. It was never hidden. It was never withheld until someone brilliant enough came along to discover it. It was here, in the language your grandparents spoke, in the sayings that survived because they refused to die, in the things people knew before they knew them. You are not behind. You are not missing something that everyone else already has. You carry centuries of human understanding in the way you move through difficulty, in the instincts that arrive before the reasoning does, in the resilience that shows up even when you are convinced it won't this time. That is not an accident. That is the inheritance. And unlike most inheritances, this one cannot be taxed, cannot be lost in a market, cannot be taken by anyone who decides they know better. It is what you are. It has always been what you are. Until next time, move slowly. That is enough.